Right now, you're hearing music made from my newest Ableton Live pack called Electric Piano. Electric Piano has 30 Ableton Live instrument racks created from samples of the 1981 Yamaha CP35 electric piano. I recorded multiple samples of every single wave voice on the Yamaha CP35 and built them into an Ableton Live instrument rack that emulates the original instrument, where you can combine two of those waveforms. From there, I built a whole bunch of presets based off of that, and even expanded upon the capabilities of the original keyboard with these special one-knob audio effect racks. The pack comes with 10 one-knob audio effects that let you kind of emulate old school vibes, rooms, sounds, and kind of wide, crazy spatial effects. They're a lot of fun, and you can use them in any sound, even stuff that's not the electric piano. All in all, it's 40 Ableton Live instrument racks that capture the sound of an old school electric piano and beyond. You can get this from my store, brianfunk.com/store, or if you join the Music Production Club during April 2021, it's part of your subscription. Head over to brianfunk.com/MPC to learn more about the Music Production Club, where you get all kinds of downloads, access to our Discord server. You get to join our live classes via Zoom that I host and go over various topics, including questions and answers, and help you with your Ableton Live music production works. There's a samples folder, and there's even special offers and discounts from companies all over the web. Check out the Music Production Club and help support my work at brianfunk.com/MPC. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Music Production Podcast. I'm your host, Brian Funk, and this is the show about all things making music. On today's episode, I have Caspar Bock from Baby Audio. And Baby Audio is a company that's making what I think are some of the cooler plugins these days. They're they're the type of plugins that add a lot of character to your music. And I love that. If any of you guys are listening to my stuff, I love really spicing things up and adding flavors and vintage vibes. And there's so much cool stuff. Some of my favorites that you guys have, like Super VHS and Spaced Out and iHeart New York, Parallel Compressor. All stuff that's not just kind of your standard tools, standard delay, or standard processing. It's stuff that'll give you some flavor. And I love what you guys are doing, and really was thankful as well for you to supply my Music Production Club with iHeart New York last month. That was great.
Oh, yeah, likewise.
A lot of people really enjoyed it, and when I had our live class meeting that we do, we had some fun playing around with it and discussing it, some of the specific uses you might have for it. It's a fun device, and it's again, it just. You can, there's like kind of like a surgical compression you might do in music, where you might grab for a different type of tool. But iHeart New York is when you want to like give stuff some power, some energy, some style. Yeah. And
that's the idea.
Yeah, I love that kind of stuff. All the flavors we can add to our music. So after that kind of long intro, everyone listening, please welcome Caspar to the Music Production Podcast.
Thank you. That was a good intro. I like it.
Thanks. The intro.
You almost said everything I wanted to say. So
all right. Perfect. So we'll wrap it up then.
Yeah, exactly.
The intros are the part I kind of worry about the most, because I feel like that's one I can mess up the most. So I'm glad you liked it.
Absolutely perfect.
It's good.
And it's funny with iHeart New York. Yeah, likewise. No, just on your note with iHeart New York. So I was thinking, obviously, before this, like, what are we going to talk about and stuff? And I think that's like a good example of what we like to do as a company, because I remember you emailed me and said you wanted to ask us about what we're about. And I think that's the perfect example, because it's so simple. And, most compressors in the plugin domain allow you to do almost anything. They have so many parameters. But with this one, we just wanted like a certain compression sound that we wanted to package into a plugin that could only do that, but do that really well. And then you use it when you need that particular flavor. And if you need like a surgical compression job done, you'll grab for other software probably. So I think that one is a good example of the kind of stuff we do.
Yeah, I think it is. I think that's the first thing I noticed about you guys. I don't know if that's where you guys, was that the first one you guys made?
Yeah, that
It
was the
was.
first one.
Okay, yeah, I
Yeah,
remember when that came out and it was like, oh, this is cool, you know? Um,
yeah,
because compressors too are so mystical, especially when you're learning. I mean, I know I've ruined so many of my mixes thinking I needed to put compressors on everything.
yeah, and too much of it. Yeah,
Yeah, I have like a few like horrible memories of like working on tracks forever and then turning all the plugins off and realizing
and it
I'd
sounds
totally
better.
spent the last month ruining my song.
Yeah, I've been there a lot as well. Definitely.
But I Heart New York is great because it's just a couple knobs and a slider, I think, and
Yeah,
a button as well.
yeah,
So
the solo button. Yeah,
it's great because you can just, even if you don't know what you're doing, you can just
yeah,
kind of turn knobs and you just listen. And sometimes I think the visuals get in the way of our ears when we're producing on computers. We're looking at
yeah,
things and watching meters and sometimes not paying attention to the actual sound. So I
yeah,
Heart New York is
totally.
great like that. It takes a lot of that out of the picture and just gives you a fun, um, pretty quick gratification with a few turns.
That was actually the idea, and that plugin also, you know, kind of was the beginning of us figuring out what this company was going to be about.
Hmm.
And it's funny what you say about the instant gratification and stuff, because where I came from, I had been using hardware a lot, and then I would sell all my hardware after a year of using it and use software a lot, and then I would get tired of using software and buy hardware, and I could never really figure out what I preferred because software was so convenient. But hardware had that thing we discussed, like with I Heart New York, where one piece of gear will just have a certain sound to it. I felt anyway that a lot of the software could do everything, but it didn't really color the sound necessarily. I know that there's software out there that does that, but a lot of this like stock plugins and like the big plugins in each category, like compression and stuff, allows you to do anything. And what I loved about my gear was that it wouldn't really be that easy to do anything, but each like piece of gear I had would color the sound in a certain way. And for I Heart New York, I had these like DBX 163X, I think it was called. Like it was like a little half rack compressor that just had one slider to it, basically, where you could add more or less compression. And it sounded so aggressive. And it just did one thing, and it really colored the sound a lot. And every time I needed to use it, I needed to rig it up in my rig because I wasn't like fully set up. So anyway, with I Heart New York, the idea was let's just do a software compressor that just really colors the sound and does one certain style of compression. People have a million compressors already, so we don't need to give them a compressor that does everything. But if we give them one that really has its own color and its own vibe, maybe we'll add something to their arsenal. So yeah, that's how it actually started, the whole thing.
Yeah, there's like so much stuff now that does everything. And
Yeah.
sometimes you just want something that does something. Like
Yeah,
the one
exactly.
thing.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Yeah.
I find myself coming back to those things almost more often just because, well, that's the thing for this job. And I'm
Yeah.
going to use that here. Whereas some of the like, I mean, there's so much great software out there, but sometimes when it doesn't have like a clear purpose, it can get lost in the world of, software that you can have in your computer. Or it's nice to
Yeah,
have
totally.
just, all right, I need this. I love I Heart New York for just like fattening things, drums especially,
Yeah.
just to give them
Yeah.
that heavy, like lingering sustain
Yeah.
and
Totally.
like impact where there's, just so many other compressors on the market that do whatever, but to have something so specific like that for character
Yeah.
purpose, I really like having like devices that are more surgical. And then this one is like, all right, I want it to color my sound and I want it to change things a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, it might be a little bit of a cheesy metaphor, but it's like if you're painting a picture and you just have this palette of different colors that you're adding, I kind of like to think of plugins like that a little bit. Like this one might be like a certain kind of green, and it's not for every purpose you'll need that green. But when you need that, you'll grab for it, and then it will instantly do what you want. I think for me and the way I work with music, that's much more gratifying than having, for instance, now we're talking compressors, like having a compressor that just does 100 different things, and it can be green and red and yellow or whatever. But every time you need to tweak 100 parameters to get it to that. I'd much rather just have like gear that does something and has a purpose and an opinion. And then when that is needed, you reach for it and it will instantly do that, and you move on to the next track.
Yeah, that just, keeps you in that creative flow. And I'm always
exactly.
kind of worried about that when I'm working. Like, if I'm feeling inspired and energized by something, this is a bad time for me to start like surgically EQing sounds or trying to like just do these more technical jobs, because that pulls me out of it. But if my drums or something, or if some sound needs a little lift or something, it's nice when you can grab that one tool that'll get you 90% of the way there.
Yeah. I think one of the things that we often talk about internally is how, music creation used to be like a very like separate process, or I guess a number of different separate processes. Like you'd sit at a piano and write a song, and then you'd go into a studio and record it, and then you'd pass it on to someone else who would mix it, and he would pass it on to someone else to master it. And it would be all these separate processes. But for people making music today, all those things are just like one melting pot. Like you'll start writing, and then you'll start mixing, and then you'll master a part of your track, and then you'll, I don't know, chop it up and put it into a new project, and then you'll write something else. And like all these different processes that used to be separate are now like just part of the same creative process of creating music. And mixing is as much a songwriting stage, or is as much a part of the songwriting stage, I think, for many people, as actual songwriting in the old sense. And I think for our plugins, we try to kind of be a part of that workflow, where someone will maybe not know exactly what it is they're trying to create yet. It's not like they have a finished track that they're starting to mix on. Maybe they're still writing the track as they're, grabbing these plugins and putting them on. And we want the plugins to contribute to that workflow, where someone is still figuring out, what is this track going to be? What is this piece of music going to end up being? So I totally agree with you.
Yeah, you know what? That's an interesting line that I guess I've never really thought about in terms of plugins. Because you're right, we're basically doing the job of a number of people in the past.
Yeah, totally.
All at once. Where, so many people are writing as they're recording, and mixing it as they're writing and recording and producing and arranging and all of these things. I think there does eventually come a point where you have to then take what you have and get a little technical. And for me, I think I reach for different tools at those different stages. When I'm in that creative writing process, it's often the faster kind of colorful things. And then later on, it's the more technical, surgical, fine-tuning stuff. If I can remember, I often slip.
Yeah.
That's the tricky thing when you're doing the 7 jobs, is it's very easy to suddenly find yourself, oh no, now I'm mixing. I didn't even finish writing my song.
You know what? I actually totally agree with you. And I think that's a very valid point. I think the world needs really surgical tools, like the fab filter stuff or whatever, where you can really just go in and tweak things down to every little detail. So it's not like we're saying that we're against that at all. But then, as you say, like at other stages in your like creative process, you might need something where you just put it on and it will do something to transform your track. So I actually agree with you. There are different stages, and you almost need like different plugins for each stage. Like for the creation process, you might need something that will just really, transform things and give you new inspiration. And then for the like final mixing process, it's another thing you need. And I think it's about just giving people as many options as possible for all these different stages.
Oh, yeah, that's cool. It's a nice like little avenue to occupy in the plugin world.
Yeah, totally. I mean, we're very aware of that, at least. Like, we don't try to compete with, not that we're measuring ourselves against FabFilter all the time, but I think they're a good example of a company where you can really go very granular with their stuff. And we're very aware that a lot of the users in our like community have those plugins and have the ability to do almost anything with the plugins they already have. So for us to be relevant for those people, we need to do something that's different than that. And that is with a lot of the stuff we do to add color and just like really radically transform tracks. as part of that creative, like songwriting and production process, more maybe than as part of like the finalization process or whatever.
That's kind of like the approach I take in the packs I make and the instruments I'm making. There are, you know, no shortage of sounds and presets and people making sample packs and Ableton Live instruments. You know, you're not gonna ever go through all of them, and so many people have done a great job. And even just when you open, you know, I use Ableton Live in my case. When you open up any DAW, you've got some like pretty standard things. Your perfect grand piano that's recorded in the most amazing studio with the finest mics, and it's immaculate. So I'm not gonna ever try to make that. First of all, I couldn't. You know, I don't have the grand piano, the space, the sound, or the mics to do that. So I like to kind of go for those things that have the kind of character and spice in it that you could, my hope is that you can take a lot of them and just kind of drop them in and get creative inspiration from there, not necessarily have to go back and find the sound. The idea is that the sound will take you through your ideas.
And when you mix them with that perfectly recorded like grand piano, then you get something interesting out of it.
Yeah. And like, you know, why really try to do that again?
Exactly.
I mean, it's hard, first of all, you know, it's a painstaking process, but it exists, you know, but there are other things that, you know, don't exist yet. I recorded a piano at my mother's house at one point. She's got a really nice baby grand piano, and it's in a nice big room too, so it's got a nice vibe. I didn't have any fancy mics with me. I told you my family's, you know, on the other side of the country down in Florida. And so all I had was an iPad to record it, and I at first was like, well, I guess I can't do it, you know, because that's snob in you, you know. But I said, what the heck? I'll just use the mic. And at the same time, too, my mom, my grandma, and my aunt were all having a conversation in the next room.
So there's like a little bit of ambience on it.
Yeah, and I could have been like, hey, you got to quiet down. I'm recording here. But, you know, I decided to keep it. And that piano now, which I have on my site for download, I'll put it in the show links. It's called Mom's Piano. It has title. Their voices in there, and as the different samples get pitched up and down, they change. They sound chipmunky. They sound like monsters. But you can never understand what they're saying in there. But you just hear there's like a life going on, and that's something like no one else has. Like no one, totally. Especially like my mom, my grandma, my aunt. I mean, now if they download it, they have it. But that kind of stuff, I think, is inspiring. You know, because like you hear the life in that, and I think a lot of your tools like help inject that life, that sort of like, that fun kind of inspiring touch that takes.
And you need contrast in a mix, right? Like. If everything is just like perfect sample libraries, it will all sound a little bit generic and the same. But once you add your mom's library to it, I'm sure that will create some of that contrast that will make the mix interesting and actually make the good things sound even better because they're contrasted against something else. I'm not saying your mom's piano sounds bad, by the way. I'm sure it sounds amazing. But it's like to have those contrasts in a mix, I think is very important.
Well, I mean, technically, you know, from a proper recording perspective, it's terrible. It's an old iPad even. So that, I mean, this was years ago. I think it was the
Vintage.
iPad 2. Yeah, right. Vintage. So the microphone wasn't so great. And it's just, I literally just put the iPad on the piano. There was not a lot of thought went into that. And there was no isolation. There was no like quiet while we're recording. So in theory, like everything is wrong about it. But like you said, when you throw that element into your track, it's something that catches your ear.
Yeah. It's like using ambient recordings in general.
Yeah.
Like anything you throw in there that's different than what else is there will add perspective, I think.
Yeah,
up to a certain point
that's something
anyway.
I love to do on all kinds of tracks, is to just have, maybe it's nature, sometimes it's even just the air of the room coming through a
Yeah,
microphone.
yeah.
Because when you have a session in your DAW and there's no clips, there's no audio in there, it's pure dead silence, which is so unusual. And
Yeah.
you
Yeah,
just,
then it lacks life a little bit.
yeah, you never have music in that kind of situation where you don't have
Yeah,
sound.
yeah,
So it's nice to kind of put those in there. It's almost like an audio illusion, I guess, where you're like kind of
yeah,
saying, here's the place this happened in.
yeah. Yeah, and it adds sometimes some frequencies that you wouldn't have otherwise, especially with like ambient noise in general. So what about your packs then? Because I've checked out like a lot of like lo-fi stuff. And do you have like a philosophy with what you're doing, or do you just say, hey, here's my mom's piano. I like how it sounds. I'm gonna sample it now. Is it more like random, or what's your process behind it?
There's definitely a random element, where I come across a sound, I come across something that for whatever reason catches my ear, or I decide to throw into like a sampler.
Mm,
There's it sometimes depends on like if I'm paying attention enough.
yeah.
I was doing a live class. I forget whether it was Berkeley or for who or what, but I was NYU. I just had Adam Rockshar from Aesthetic Candy. He's an artist, animator, Maxwell Live programmer. So he had me come visit his NYU class on music production. So we were talking there, and I'm trying to like gush out all my like thoughts on creating your own instruments in a half an hour.
Yeah. Yeah.
And one of the samples I'd recorded was a drill going into a concrete wall. So
Right.
it was at my school where I work. It was in the hallway. They were installing thermometers to take everyone's temperature. So like when all the kids come in, they just go up to there and it beeps. And,
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
7 a.m, you sound like you're in the grocery store.
Yeah.
Beep,
Okay.
beep.
Yeah.
Everyone's
Is that like
getting
COVID
scanned.
tests or?
Oh, it's for temperature. So to make sure no one has a fever.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
But while they were installing them, it was, the middle of the school day, and they're drilling into this concrete wall in this huge, long hallway. And it just had this, it was, I mean, when you heard it, it was, it was an awful sound, and it was totally distracting. You can't even think over it. But I recorded
Yeah.
it with my phone because it's all I had. And I was throwing it inside the sampler and making these like really smooth, lush pads out of it.
Oh, nice.
And
Did you pitch it down or?
well, I figure out like what the pitch of the whatever pitch that is, and I set that, and then you can play it across the keyboard. So it's one I'll probably polish up.
Cool. I want to check that out.
Yeah, I have to polish it up, set up some like effects and macros, and I'll release that at some point. But it's like, I guess the philosophy is I'm just trying to pay attention to what could be a cool sound. I like exploring, I guess. Like that's one of the big fun parts for me, is like the discovery. Like finding what'll happen when I take this drill. It's an awful sound.
Yeah. But can you make it interesting?
Yes, sometimes you'd really be surprised. And so I guess I'm just trying to find unusual things and interesting takes on stuff.
What's your most popular pack so far to date?
I think the most popular one I sell is it's called 80s VHS Synths.
Oh, okay.
Which you have Super VHS as a plugin, which I love. I think that's really cool. But I recorded all my synths, or a bunch of synths, to VCR tape, and then brought those samples back into live. And they have kind of the hiss and the inconsistency of the tape.
Yeah, it sounds great, right?
Yeah, it's like instant feeling. Yeah. So that might be the most popular one I sell. I'm not sure with all the free ones. I know like the 100-year-old piano is pretty popular. That's an upright piano I have in my house. Same kind of idea where it's all, you know, that piano in the state it's in right now, you can hardly play it. It's a little bit out of tune, and it needs a little work and all that. But at the time when I recorded it, you know, I had to tune the strings a little, and even still, like some of the piano strings, the keys have more than one string, so they're not always in tune with it themselves.
Yeah.
But it has a lot of character. When you play it, you can hear the clicks of the hammers and the mechanisms. All that stuff you would probably try to edit out. You know, if you were making the you know, official piano preset for your DAW's release or something.
Yeah, that's likely.
Yeah, but it's really nice to hear it in the instrument, because, like you said, it's got that feeling. It's got that little thing that stands out.
Mm. Yeah, totally. I think that's what music should be about, you know, to try and add something that sounds unique and that hasn't been heard before. And I think you need to mix a lot of different elements in your mix to get it interesting. That's often how it goes. So like going back to the whole color talk, I think that's the idea. Like if you can add different tracks together that really do something unique, then the sum of all those sometimes, you know, yields more interesting results.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do, really. I'm trying to make like colorful sounds. The guiding light is that if I want it, then I'll make it.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
You know, I've done a couple where I was trying to like chase trends. I did like a dubstep pack a few, like, probably almost 10 years ago now. And just because that was the thing, I wanted to see if I could synthesize some of those sounds. But I, you know, personally, I never used those. Like, it wasn't really for me. I don't really enjoy that kind of work. You know, I like trying to find something interesting that, if worst case scenario, if no one downloads it, no one looks at it, no one ever hears about it, at least I have it now.
Yeah.
It's in my palette for sound.
I feel the same way. I think chasing trends always goes wrong, right? Like, because it's so hard to guess what people want anyway. Like, for instance, to give you a related example, like with Super VHS, our idea was actually, so I'm really into like this kind of Italo disco music from the 80s, like these like very like 80s electronic disco albums. And the idea for Super VHS was just to do something that would give that kind of sound, which is like the smallest, most untrendy thing ever. But then it kind of turned out that there was this whole like lo-fi plugin trend when we released it. And you know, I think that's been one of my most like popular plugins, but it was never the idea that it would be a part of that whole lo-fi trend. Like the real idea was to see how do you make something that transforms your sounds into like this 80s, like low quality, low disco, European disco synth vibe, you know? So I think it's better just to do what you're passionate about. And if it's good enough, you know, people will find other uses for it. And then it may become trendy or it may not. But as long as you follow your passion, someone's going to find a use for it, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think so. I tell you, I was looking for like something to emulate the VHS sound for a long time myself. And ultimately, I really couldn't find anything, which is why I started recording my samples right to the tape. You know, I searched some thrift stores for a VCR that was working, and you know, just the tape to put in there, and because there just wasn't really anything out there that I knew of that could emulate like a VCR. So when you came out with Super VHS, I was like, awesome! Finally, you know, this is a really cool effect that. Because I don't know if it's just because I grew up watching VCR tapes and I remember some of those weird inconsistencies, and hearing it now sort of triggers something emotionally on a nostalgic level.
Yeah, totally. Actually, there's like an important distinction that now I have a chance to explain it. So with Super VHS, it's not really like strictly a VHS emulation. So the idea is more, because I grew up watching VHS tapes, and I recorded my favorite song from MTV onto VHS and would play them back and whatever. The idea with Super VHS is more to capture the essence of that kind of 80s pop music recorded onto VHS tape, discovered 10 years later, played back. So there's like a reverb on there. There's a bit crusher there, chorus as well, which are things that obviously that's colors that are not, you know, added by a VHS deck in itself. So the idea, just to clarify that with Super VHS, was more like all these like music videos you'd record in the 80s and play back later. What would they sound like when you played them back? Part of it was down to the way the VCR deck colored the sound, but the other part of it was down to how things were produced back then, you know, with poor reverbs and, you know, not so high sample rates and stuff. So Super VHS is actually an attempt to take all those things, like both how music was recorded in the 80s and that kind of sound, and how a VCR deck would color the sound, and put that together into one plugin. So it's not meant to be like a strict VCR deck emulation. It's more like it's just like an ode to that whole era, the VCR or the VHS era, and the kind of sounds back then. So yeah, I've always wanted to clarify that, because some people say, hey, why does a VHS emulation have a chorus on it? That has nothing to do with emulating the VHS. So now I've said it. Now I've explained the idea behind it.
Yeah, I was surprised too to see there was a reverb on it when I first.
But that's why it's like it's a celebration of the VHS era, basically, and both in terms of production back then and also, of course, the medium VHS tape.
Yeah, and it was a pleasant surprise, though. I think it's nice that you can take Super VHS and you can get like that sound of like kind of the drifting, inconsistent tape, but it's also kind of fun to use like to warm things up, because you got the I forget what the knob is called on that left side. I think it's like a heat or something. Heat,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean that's like on its own can be a really just useful kind of color distortion, little harmonic stuff going on. It's fun. It's nice that it has that. And again, you've still managed to keep it really simple and straightforward.
Yeah, that's one of the things we always think about. Like, you know, when you're producing a track or mixing a track, chances are you have like 50 individual tracks that you're balancing. And on each of them, you have, I don't know, like 5 plugins. So that's 250 plugins that you're balancing. So we're very aware of how in that process, it's better to just give people a few things to really add some character, because chances are there's 249 other plugins they need to deal with in their production. So yeah, that's something we try to, and say like, okay, with the heat, there's a lot of different things you can do to create like an analog tape saturation algorithm. And of course, there's a lot of parameters under the hood, and we could have, you know, made them free or made them like put them in the interface as well and given them to the user. But instead, we decided to just calibrate it in a certain way, and then say the only thing the user controls is how much of it does he or she want.
I've been having a lot of fun with that kind of process with now in Live 11. They give you the option to have as many macros as you want, 1 through 16, when you make a rack. And I mean, you could always have done just one knob. I've done that in the past, but you still see the other 7. Now you can have it literally just be one. So it's kind of drawn me back into making a few like one knob things that as you turn it, it turns a lot of knobs. And you could, of course, have the other things available, but there is, when we're talking again about like that kind of quick satisfaction, there's something nice about just grabbing it and how much do I want? Good.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, totally.
You know,
I think,
yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. Well, no, it's just like, I think when things are simple, that's really when you start being creative, because it's not up to the tool anymore to, you know, like, well, what I'm trying to say is like, it's not the tool that's going to change the sound now. It's you and what you do. Like, it's like when you have the Juno chorus and there's just one button.
Yeah.
You figure out a way to then tweak your synth that complements how that chorus sounds, because you can't sit and tweak 30 parameters associated with the chorus. And I think it just forces you to use that instrument differently, because the chorus sounds in one way. So then you have to design your sound around it. I think sometimes in the creative process, it's actually really liberating that you can't do a lot. And you have to then figure out, okay, how do I make the most of these limitations?
I totally agree because, yeah, you turn it on, that's what you have. It's like commitment. There's so much
Yeah,
commitment you
yeah,
have to make when you're making a song. It's nice sometimes when you don't even get the choice.
yeah. It's
You
what I
just,
love about guitar pedals, for instance.
mhm.
You know, they're like a big inspiration because guitar pedals are so simple. And especially if you actually use them as a guitarist and you can only turn them off and on in a live show, for instance, that's such a limited workflow compared to working in Ableton or whatever. But still, you know, people then figure out a way to find their own sound and combine things in new ways and express themselves for how they play. And I think that's really interesting.
Mm.
To me, that's more creative than just having 200 parameters, and you're more of an engineer than a creator, you know?
Yeah. Well, I think that's where you get creative is when you run into those walls and you have this problem. Like, this is the chorus on my synthesizer. End of
Yeah,
story. Now what do I
yeah,
do? Instead
yeah,
of yeah, like okay, this has a chorus with 17 parameters I can adjust. So if you don't like it, you can just turn knobs. Or if you're in your DAW and you aren't feeling one sound, you have 900,000 other presets you can try. I don't know that
yeah,
that's being creative. That's sort of just like, let's try this, let's try this. You're not kind of like working. You're not molding the clay as much. You're just
exactly.
like looking to see if there's another piece of clay that kind of looks like the thing you're trying to build.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, that can be very limiting, actually,
Hmm.
and also make you feel like you're not good enough in a way because you don't know. Like, there's always something that might be better than what you're doing right now, and I think it creates like a lot of fatigue and a lot of like fear even sometimes when you're producing and there's too many options in front of you. Sometimes you just need to limit it and just say, this is what I have and I'm going to make it as good as possible.
I think so. I think
Yeah,
that's where the creative muscles get flexed.
yeah, totally.
Hey, I wanted to almost like maybe like compare notes with you. So
Yeah.
a while back, because I couldn't find anything like Super VHS, I made a VCR or VHS rack, which I'm trying to just see if I can find a picture of it on my own site so I can take you through it a little. All right, so I am sharing just the screen of this
Yeah.
this instrument here. Did I open it up? I didn't open it up. All right. So the way I went about it, I'm kind of curious if there's any sort of what kind of differences we may have both like thought about in creating this like
Yeah.
VCR sound. So I've got these 3 wow flutter knobs, which are in a row. Are Ableton's got a frequency shifter device, which you
Hmm.
can use to just kind of move the pitch a little. So when you set it at like these small amounts, like if you don't go like above like 4 hertz or so, it's enough movement where you notice it, but it doesn't totally, it doesn't
Yeah.
ruin your track. So I had 3 of those set up, so you can have the pitch moving with 3 different sine wave patterns.
Oh, interesting.
I
How does it sound?
I think it's kind of cool. To me, this is
Yeah.
sort of like your drift knob, right?
Yeah, that's like a lo-fi, like an LFO that controls the pitch.
Mm-hmm.
And there's like a little bit of random to it as well, so it's not just doing the same thing all the time.
Right, because if it's too consistent, then it just starts to sound.
Yeah, then it becomes static.
Yeah.
So that's like pitch shifting, but also some vibrato effect to it as well.
Okay, because that's sort of what I was getting at with this Zoom thing is in my way. With the 3, rather than we could have used like Max for Live to modulate the rate and the amount of the sine wave, but I thought what I would do instead is just have 3 different modulations going, and they're all interacting with each other. So it wouldn't be, like you said, as predictable. And you have a chorus as well, and I'd put yours is like the magic. I don't know if that's necessarily exactly chorus, but I did something similar with just the chorus control.
And what did you use for the chorus?
That's just
like
the chorus.
A normal.
Yeah, just the stock chorus inside of Live. And I think your magic button is doing, it's kind of like a chorus, but there's something else to it too. It's
There's also some filtering.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so for actually, I mean, that's the magic button is a good way to go off on a tangent about like how we work and stuff, because it's kind of inspired by the Juno 60 analog chorus, but instead of just trying to model how that exactly, works and to see if we can rebuild that in the box, it was more like thinking how, like when you press that button on the Juno, it just does something very special. Yeah. Of course, it widens the sound, it detunes it a little bit, and just adds like a different like EQ response curve a little bit. That's what it sounds like anyway. And we wanted the magic button to be like a digital equivalent of that. Not that it had to sound exactly like the Juno 60 chorus, but we wanted something that also just when you pressed it, it would just do some magic stuff. That was the name anyway. So yeah, what it does is it's a chorus, and it's pretty detuned, but then there's also the EQ curve, and there's a filter, and there's a few other things like also saturation, but very gently. So it's like a few things that are coming together.
Yeah, that's cool. I've got a little saturator and then a compressor afterwards. I might I'd have to open it up, and I'm kind of afraid to just touch anything while I'm recording right now. But I might have like
I'd be curious to listen to it.
Yeah, I will put it on our conversation as we're talking in the final thing, so we can all hear and everyone listening. I'll make myself a note. But I think I might have cut like some of the higher frequencies as well, because I've read somewhere that the VCR tapes, I think they get cut off around like 10K. They have a pretty steep drop off in those high frequencies.
And they have a worse high-end response in general. So we do the same thing. Like the whole plugin under the hood has like an EQ curve that follows the VCR.
Right. Oh, that's cool.
Loosely, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting to understand. And now you have some like fun features too that would have been, I don't really know that I could have done as easily in a rack. Like with the static, I'm thinking especially like that kind of like tape hiss.
That's actually a synth. Like that's a soft synth. Yeah, just like a very simple one. So it's a noise oscillator and a few other things, but it's just like a very basic soft synth that just generates static noise that's then filtered and designed to sound like a VHS kind of noise. And all it does is it goes up and down. You can add more or less.
Yeah, kind of.
But it's actually like on Super VHS, we have had a lot of people asking us to do a more elaborate version or to open up more features. So we are working on a V2, and the V2 will give control over some of these like synth parts on the static control. So you can design your own static noise, and also we'll add like a gate to it, so you can ensure that it only hits when the sound is actually playing, and it doesn't leave your project with a lot of static noise otherwise. And so we're opening up some of these features for version 2 pretty soon.
That's cool. So you can make it almost sound like it's only playing the VCR. Say I've got drums that I want to sound like they came with VCR. You'll only hear that noise when it's playing.
Yeah, we could do like adaptive noise, or just simply a gate. So whenever there's a signal, it will come back on. Right now, it's very basic. It's just a volume control.
That's cool. On the instruments I've made, I have layers, like they're instrument racks. So you got like the actual samples that came off the VHS tape. But I also put another layer in that is just the hiss of the VCR.
Yeah.
And it's there's no real control over it because it's just whatever this particular VCR noise is, which varies, depending on what you have. But it's fun to just like turn that up and add it in. And since it's in an instrument, it'll only trigger when you hold down the keys, and it goes away like that. So it has that effect too.
But that hiss is very gratifying. I think if you're from that era, it sounds good,
Yeah, I mean, I've used it even just like as a bed on a track. Just put the hiss or tape hiss. Sometimes people do vinyl crackles and things. But yeah, to like just kind of when you are, especially like if you have headphones on and you hear just the noise, the life, the world of the song
Yeah.
is there instead of just pure sterile silence.
It's the kind of thing, if you turn it off, you'll miss it. But
Yeah,
oftentimes you can put it so low that you don't really hear it, but it just adds a little bit of dimension and
right.
realness to the sound.
Yeah. Uh, Something that I think might be good there. I'll go back to this here. Something that I think we kind of touched on in our conversations that is so funny is that all of this stuff we're talking about is the kind of stuff that tortured me 15 years ago, 20
Yeah,
years
yeah,
ago when I
totally.
was recording, and I had like my 4-track tape recorders, and it was so noisy, and it would just, that was what you're trying to get rid of. But
Yeah.
now we're seeing this movement where we've kind of realized like that was something special. There was something to that. Where I guess, you know, we never wanted it to be out of control back then. When we took it away completely, it was kind of surprising that we missed it.
It was like a race to perfection and now a race to imperfection almost. A
Yeah.
little bit, right? Yeah. Yeah, it's true.
Because, yeah, like, I mean, this device in a way is, there's some like degradation going on of your sound. You know, it's
Yeah.
like deliberate
Yeah.
degradation, but it's pleasing. And I just, I don't know if I understand why. I know I love it, but like
Yeah.
it seems counterintuitive, right? Like, wait, you're gonna add noise?
Yeah. Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
gonna make it less in tune?
I agree with you 100%. Once you start doing those things, like adding noise, as we've talked about, or detuning it a little bit, it just sounds richer and has more depth to it. But I don't know if we've been primed to think of music like, like as if music is good when that is happening, because we've heard so many retro records, or
Yeah.
if it's something that's just like deeper and like a human thing, we just like imperfections. But I agree with you. I like it. I like when music is not perfect, but I'm not entirely sure why that
Mhm.
is. It's interesting though, right?
Yeah, and every like thing I wished I could conquer back in the old days is conquerable. I can be
Yeah.
in perfect time and perfect tune with
Mm.
perfectly recorded instruments from the finest engineers and producers in the world. And when I put those all together, I find the music that I'm making lacks something.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
somewhere along the way in subtracting away these problems, I've created a new problem.
Yeah. Yeah. It's true. It's almost like a post-digital world in a way,
Mhm.
right? Because we've reached perfection and now we need to figure out how do we get things to sound unique and personal again,
Yeah.
which is also not necessarily to just destroy things, like, but somewhere maybe there's a happy medium where you add your mom's piano and then you have, I don't know, like strings that are perfectly recorded and you add the whole thing together. Or like, I think mixing and matching is sometimes the way to go in
Mm.
productions, to take some elements that are super hi-fi and mix them with other elements that are not so hi-fi, and then together they'll create something unique and have something that's like perfectly on the beat, like and synced up with the BPM, and then other things that are a little bit sloppy, and if you mix them together it will really start sounding like something.
Mm. Yeah, that's true. I think that mix is good to have. It's nice to embrace like something a little of a different quality in your
Yeah.
work. And like you said, the timing. When I first got Pro Tools back, I think it was like 2005, I didn't really know anything about sampling, or I was a guitarist and I'm trying to make these songs. And my idea of recording the drums was I was going to get each individual hit and have a little audio file for each
Yeah.
drum. And I had like different like velocities, I guess. Like I had quiet to
Yeah.
loud. And I would just kind of figure out, all right, how loud would the drummer be playing on this beat and this beat? What would and literally just dropping it on the grid one at a time.
Yeah.
Now it's so much easier to put in like a drum rack or something and just
Yeah.
play or
Yeah, of
something.
course. Yeah.
But I didn't know any of that. And but I found out right away, like, it just doesn't sound right. You know, it was weird. It didn't feel right. But I then started playing the hi-hats and the cymbals live. So to those beats that I'd placed on the grid. And that just opened it up like crazy. It made it feel so much more alive because of all of my sloppiness.
Yeah.
So it was almost like there's like two drummers on the one drum part. You got me in real life, and then you've got, where it's supposed to be, kind of
And did
working
it
with
sound
each
like
other.
one thing, or
Yeah,
like two separate
I
things?
still think like, yeah, it sounds like a thing.
Yeah, totally.
It was nice to just like realize that, like, oh, if I just play this part, even though it's not as good as it could be if I just put it down one by one, it feels better.
Yeah, I agree. Like with programmed drums, I love to add like just hand played percussion, and I'm a really bad percussionist. But if I program drums and they sound like perfect, which they will on a computer, if you want them to, and you then have like a sloppy percussion track added, and you loop it, then suddenly it will start feeling like the whole thing is alive.
Yeah.
Because the things that are out of time kind of compete with the things that are in time, and together they form something that's much more personal than if you just took like a loop or whatever and worked with that.
Right. Yeah, it's good strategy always to just do something by hand once in a while.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
So how did you get into the plugin world? To me, it sounds like, I wouldn't even know where to start. I wouldn't even know like what software you're using to create the plugins. And as I got into like, making my racks and my instruments, it's a thought that kind of crossed my mind. Like, well, I wonder if I could ever make this into like an audio unit or VST, but it just was a whole other universe of programming and stuff. So I guess, like, was there something that got you into it in particular, or what made you make the decision? Do you have a background in programming?
Well, it was kind of a very lucky process, and also a little bit random. So my background actually is in advertising. So I created digital products for brands. And obviously I made music, and at times in my life I tried to make music full time and would never really break through. And my day job was always like creating digital products and campaigns in advertising. But I had a lot of ideas, and I was also tired of my work. It was like literally a day job. And I just had this love for making music and for certain tools that I thought were missing, like going back to what we talked about early on, about creating things that add color and are not so surgical and engineering minded, but creating effects plugins that are more for the creative process. So I started like conceptualizing and like just designing these plugins and coming up with the ideas and designing like signal chains for how I would like the different plugins to work. And then I was lucky, so I found a guy. So my business partner, a guy called Joachim, a Dutch guy, who is a programmer and who does the programming part. And he was like on this ambition, or with me on this ambition to do this. And we teamed up, and this was relatively early in 2019. So it's not been that long. And he had been working as a freelancer, as a freelance plugin programmer for a while, and had a code library and obviously had the experience to do it. And so he was like at a place where he was ready also to take a lot of that learning and use that in a good way. And I had my background from doing digital products for brands and stuff. And so together we started building these, and now there's more people on the team. But that was kind of the start for it. So it was a little bit random, but I guess if I'm being perfectly honest, I just wanted to do something I cared about. I was working in advertising in New York as well at the time. And it was not something I loved doing, and you get into this very dangerous place in your life where you're making enough money that you can't lose your job all of a sudden because your rent is high. And it was kind of a weird place to be in. And I was very lucky that, so we moved, my wife and I, after we started the company, and I was just lucky that it all worked out, and that I met Joachim as well, who's like, I can say this because I'm not him, but he's like a genius and very good at programming, and then we've made a good team. So it's like I will come up with like the UX design and the idea, and sometimes the channel strips and how it's supposed to sound. But he can turn all of that into actual code and make it happen, you know. So yeah, that I don't know. I went off on a tangent there. If it actually answered your question, cool, but otherwise, feel free to ask again. But yeah, that's how it started, you know.
Did you say 2019?
Yeah, this was early.
Really? Like when did I Heart New York come out? I feel like I've been with it for so long. It's 2019. Yeah, I feel like I've been dabbling with that thing for like 5 years. It's so funny. I guess the last few years have been long ones.
I guess so. But the last year has been 5 years in itself, right?
Well, then this has been a really wild, fast ride for you guys then, because, you've come out with so many devices, and they're just like, I'm seeing them all over the place. People are really getting into them, really using them. They're quite popular. I just didn't realize it had been in such a short time frame. That's incredible.
It's been very surprising. Yeah, it's gone fast, and I think maybe it's because it's a small community still, and people who are into gear are also talking about gear with their friends all the time. So if you do something and people like it, I'm sure, you know, then they'll start talking to their friends about it, and then it's probably easier to grow fast organically than if you made, I don't know, like glasses or like, I don't know, computer mouses or whatever, you know, like plugins and gear is just like something people love to talk about and share. And I think so we were kind of lucky and got good support as well from users that had big followings and shared it on social media, and the magazines took it in, like Sound on Sound and stuff like that, Computer Music, and these magazines started writing about it. And yeah, so it's really surprised me, like honestly, like when we started out, because obviously I was, now I'm just being honest about the whole situation, like I wanted to get out of my day job, but I also thought this is never going to be with plugins. Like I thought maybe if we were lucky, we would sell 500 plugins a year and it would be a good hobby to have. And that's why we did it. But I was convinced there's no chance I would ever make a living from selling these plugins, because that's way too niche of a field. But I just really wanted to do it. And I thought this is a fun thing to do while I still have my day job. And it's something I'm passionate about. And I wanted to, you know, as we talked about earlier in this talk, like I wanted to do this DBX 163 style compressor. And yeah, so we didn't necessarily have a lot of expectations. And then it came out and just went really fast. And now it's a living. I mean, not like exceptionally good or anything, but it's a living, and I never thought it would be. I honestly thought it would just be something we did because we were passionate and we would have some fun with it and learn something from it. But people have really, taken it in and shared it with their friends, and it's grown very fast. So that's great.
Well, I think you guys are doing something that a lot of companies haven't really done, and you're filling in like areas that are kind of open still. And I think that's where a lot of the neat stuff pops up these days, whether it's the UI or it's just the approach. Certain companies have come up where they've just done it in a neat way and not so traditional. I think the layout and the look of your plugins is really nice, and it's very like apparent what's going on pretty quickly. And that's always a tricky thing, I think, when you're putting like knobs and faders and these like real world things on a screen that you're now going to interact with a mouse on, or especially even like a touch screen, I know you guys aren't doing that, I don't think, but
we're starting to. We're looking into it. Yeah.
Cool.
The idea is by the end of the year to get something out, but
nice.
That's a whole different project, but we're looking into that.
Yeah, it's a translation that in both cases of this is a knob I touch and I feel and I have control over compared to something else. And sometimes it just doesn't work out that well, where you're looking at these like maybe virtual consoles and they got the knobs and it looks like the real thing, but it's just not fun to turn those knobs and move those faders. But you guys have done it in a way that yeah, it's that's not even a thought. It's just easy to interact with. Do you think that some of your advertising background played a role in some of those considerations? Because advertising needs to be pretty accessible, right? It needs to
Yeah,
capture people fast, and no one really wants to see an advertisement, you know?
yeah, for
So
sure.
you have to kind of pull them in.
I think for sure it did. You know, like I'm sometimes hating on it because obviously I did it because I needed to do something and I wanted to get out of it. But I also want to love on it a little bit. I don't know if you can say that, but you know, I had a great time there, and I learned a lot from being in that world, especially about how if you want to say something to people, you need to say it very fast and very specifically, and things need to look good, and you need to collaborate with people who are really good at what they do instead of trying to do everything yourself. And I think there were a lot of lessons I learned doing that. That you know, I wouldn't say our products are advertisements, but you can still apply some of those lessons, I guess, about simplifying things for people and getting to the core of or the essence of what something's supposed to do. So yeah, I guess that's true. That there are some of these learnings that have made their way into how we work as well.
Yeah, well, I think when we look at a new plugin, we're getting almost like 95% of our opinion forming in a second or two. We're seeing this thing
Yeah,
and we're taking it in and trying to figure out what it is really quickly. And I think it's only if that captures you that you go into reading what it actually does and watching the maybe 2-minute video about the demonstration or
yeah.
something. But it kind of needs to be something that you say, ooh, you know, what's going on there? And I think that has got to be this similar thing with, I mean, advertising is always trying to surprise you and catch you
Yeah.
off
No,
guard.
that's true. I also often think about how, you know, with hardware gear, there are so many senses that are stimulated at once. Like you can look at it, you can listen to it. Of course, listening is the most important thing, but you can touch it. Sometimes you can even smell it. Like if it's old analog gear, there's so many senses that are in action when you're interacting with a piece of analog hardware gear. And with software, there's only two things. There's the listening part, which is the most important thing, and then there's the visual aspect. But those are the only two things we have to give people a good experience and a good interactive experience with this plugin. So it's really important that you really maximize what those two things do then, because you don't have the tangibility that hardware has, where someone wants to dial every knob to find out how it sounds. Like it's a static interface on a screen. So I think the two senses that users interact with this plugin with, the hearing and the visual aspect, they're very important. And you need to make sure that every knob actually transforms the sound, and that the visual part of it makes sense and is like stimulating for someone's creativity. And I'm not saying we've perfected that. It's something we're always just working with and trying to improve on. Like, how can we take those two things and really make them pop with our products?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think
But it's something we're aware of for sure.
yeah. Well, it does make a difference, you know, what you're looking at in your screen.
Yeah.
I think like when you go into like Logic, you have all this access to like these like generic like sound processing devices, and they're just like the normal like Apple Finder graphics with like a slider.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about? And
Yeah,
they do the
totally.
job, right? They're cutting the frequency, whether they're compressing or whatever it is they do. But they're just like, I never want to use those. You know,
Yeah.
it's just not
I think the
inviting.
visual part is super important.
But
I think it's super
tricky.
snobby
It's
to
tricky
disqualify
because
it.
yeah, it's definitely, to disqualify it is yeah, that's not a good idea, because it definitely plays a part. But there's also like this line too where if you take it too far, then it's like, what am I even looking at? And
For sure.
I feel like
But
there was a
yeah.
reverb I was looking at purchasing. I can't remember which one it was, but I just knew, and it sounded good. It was cool, but I just knew that I was never going to use it because there was just too much going on. You know, I could move all this stuff and change all
Right.
this, and it was,
Yeah.
I would never do it. I wound up getting a Valhalla Reverb instead because it was so easy. I mean, they sound great, but they're just like real nice, clean presentation.
Yeah.
And I'd use that one all the time.
Yeah.
But I know that pulling out that other reverb would have just been like a project every single time.
Yeah, totally. I agree with that. I think the visual plays a much bigger role than what it's given credit for sometimes. You know, I think people, when they're creative, they need impulses to you know, just feed that creativity. And if you're looking at a screen and everything you look at is dull and static, then that's the state of mind you're in when you're creating. And I think it's important for plugins to just also like not just sound the part, but look the part. And when they pop up on your screen, when you load them up, it needs to trigger something in the brain where you're like, oh, okay, now I'm looking at something else than what I was looking at before. And those constant like interactions between the user and the products, I think, help create better music for the user, because you're constantly challenged, not just in your ears, but also in your eyes, you know?
Yeah. You know, I wanted to ask you a little bit. I think we kind of touched on this before we started recording. This like idea of like creative expression through creating these sort of tools, where I think that, you know, it has a really big impact on music in general. When you put out a tool like Super VHS or like Comeback Kid, the delay, that gives all sorts of like it kind of informs the user how to use the thing, you know. So like it kind of points them in a direction, and you know, I think you mentioned earlier before we started talking, like Autotune and what that did to how that shaped
Totally.
music creation incredibly. I thought it just might be interesting to hear you get into that a little bit as far as like a creative person goes, how this kind of work scratches that itch for you, where you're, because it's like kind of a technical thing in a way. You're making a tool for people to use, but the tools inform the kind of work we make.
Yeah. So what do you mean if it's something that is that our tools help people shape their sound, or what exactly?
Yeah, I guess I didn't really ask you a question.
Sorry, I think you cut out there.
Yeah, I don't know that I actually
No. I
asked
just
you
want
a
to make sure I
question too.
understand.
It's maybe it's a point, but are you finding like this a creative, you know, like we make music, we express ourselves. Are you finding like a form of expression through this as well? And yeah, what are you just what are your thoughts? Like it's almost a responsibility, right? Like if you put out a plugin, and especially now, I think where you know, Baby Audio is pretty well established. A lot of people know about it and use your stuff. The next thing you put out is going to affect the way people work.
Yeah, I think about it. I think mainly about it in the sense that I don't want to disappoint people. Like, I think there's a lot of internal pressure in a good way that we keep doing things people are into. That's one way I think about it, that I really want to make sure we keep making people excited about what we do. So it's more from that angle, I think, that it affects our work, that we really want to make sure people like it. And the worst thing that could happen to us was we release something and people think it's not as good as the other stuff we've done. In terms of how it affects the sound that people create when using the plugins, I still think, honestly, that a lot of producers are going to find their own sound, and they're going to use a bunch of different plugins, and how our plugins color their sound is going to be such a minimal part of their entire production that we can't really take any credit for any of it. But it is interesting.
You don't want to be in the liner notes.
No. I mean, I get what you're saying, though.
I wonder if you're being a little humble about it too, because I do think that the tools that we are given are what we have to work with.
Yeah, no, it's interesting, and we talked about it before we started the podcast, and I think Autotune is a great example because that really does something so radical that when someone uses it at a high setting, that's going to be the sound. But I'm also honest when I say I don't know if I think any of our products are that radical yet. I mean, we're working on stuff that might be, but I definitely find it like creatively like stimulating to develop these products and just do something that I find like this is our craft now. That's what we do. We make plugins, and then to make them as good as possible. That's like a big. There's a lot of pride involved in that, and it's something that's like consumes my life like all the time to make our products as good as possible, come up with good ideas, and it's like anyone who like it's when someone makes music and you know, because I've done that as well and been really into making music. Like making plugins now is now the equivalent of making music, like and making them as good as possible. And because they are so colored, it's about designing the underlying algorithms and what's actually happening when people dial the knobs and so on. And so there's a lot of creativity in that. I don't know if that answers the question, like in terms of making sure like the heat knob or whatever sounds in a certain way. Like we spend hours and hours and hours on just tweaking that. So it sounds exactly like how we want it to sound. And we're very like passionate about that, but I don't think it really, I don't think we're that big that it changes music, that our algorithm sounds in a certain way. But maybe one day, who knows?
Well, I kind of get that too. You know, when I make my sounds and my instruments, it's a creative like itch I'm scratching, just like writing a song is in a lot of ways. And you're coming up. You're creating something that wasn't there before. And
exactly. Yeah, it's like creating music in a way.
And it's always fun to hear what people do with it afterwards. For me, I'm sure you get a kick out of that one.
Totally.
I follow you guys on Instagram, and you guys are always sharing when people, you know, have like one of your devices in a track. So clearly, you guys are like on the lookout and paying attention to when people use your stuff. I'm sure that's a satisfying feeling to know that helped direct.
Yeah, I love that. It's the best thing after releasing a product to go out and check videos on YouTube and Instagram and stuff and just seeing how people use them. And I always find that they use them differently than what we did, you know? So when we finish a product, we have maybe 4 or 5 reference tracks that we're honing in on and we're kind of testing it against those, you know? So it's the same music over and over again that we're using for reference when tweaking the products. And we use it in a certain way and we calibrate it to do a certain thing at a certain stage in that reference track. And then you see someone use it after it's released and they use it completely differently. And you're like, oh, we didn't really test for it to be used in this way, you know? And I kind of love that it's one thing when we release it and in our heads is one thing. And, you know, with Super VHS, that's an example too, like we talked about earlier. Like I wanted it to be this kind of certain like European Italo disco sound, but it's being used for totally different styles of music out there, you know, like, and people just take it and make it their own. And I think that's very satisfying to see for sure.
I'm sure the lo-fi hip hop community is all over.
Yeah. I mean, exactly. That's probably where there's the biggest user base right now. And yeah, I think, but that's also what makes a producer creative. When you take a tool that's maybe created for one thing and then you use it in a different way. I think gear is made to be, or gear should be abused sometimes, you know? I think that the heroes are always the producers who take a piece of gear and use it in a different way than it was intended. And that's actually coming back to Autotune, also what happened. I'm sure it was never the idea when they created Autotune that it would be used in such a radical way. And then that became a sound.
Oh, I've read an interview with the creators or somebody involved in Autotune, and they almost didn't have that, you know, instant tuning as a possible setting because they were no one's ever going to want this. And then
that sounds horrible.
You know, like,
I'm not going to use that.
That Cher song comes out and hits number one or whatever, and that was a real shock. People like, no one's going to want to use that. And look at, I mean, that was just the tip of the iceberg. And it's a style of like vocal production now.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. I think it's always about the user.
Mm-hmm.
As a manufacturer, you can't really take that much credit. It's about the user just doing stupid things, and then suddenly it transforms their tracks in an interesting way.
Can you recall any kind of surprise moments where you saw people taking your devices and just doing something totally unexpected with, or yielding results you just never imagined possible?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is, but that's more of a negative than a positive. Sometimes there's been like YouTube reviews of the plugins where they're used so much against their purpose, or so different from their purpose, that I'm just sitting, by the screen and just yelling, like, just tweak this, just, turn this knob a little bit. It's going to sound 20 times better if you do that. And you're powerless, right? Because but that's not a positive. Yeah, I think it happens all the time. Like every time someone demonstrates it and shows how they're using a plugin on their tracks, they do it a little different than I would have used it. And I'm so familiar with the plugins, I know exactly how they're meant to be used from our perspective. Mm-hmm. So it's always interesting to see how people start in a different place and definitely also end up in a different place than what we had in mind. But I think that's great. That's fun.
Yeah, I like that kind of stuff. I love when I can find a new way to abuse something and use it improperly. I think that's where a lot of people's like personality as a producer and a musician start to come out. These kind of interesting things that they start doing.
Yeah.
Maybe they weren't supposed to. All the way back to like guitar feedback, like that wasn't what we were supposed to. Even the electric guitar itself was
totally
not what it was intended to be. It was supposed to just be a louder acoustic guitar.
That sounded worse, right? Everyone
was upset about it. It wasn't pure. And it wasn't until they said, exactly, that's why I like it, that it became. I could see how what you said, though, is one of the dangers of a lot of the work you guys do when you're trying to make a compressor, like, let's say, I think I Heart New York is probably a really good example of this, because it's a compressor, but it's not your for every job compressor. It's if I'm going to like look at this, okay, I got this compressor, let me use it in these traditional ways. I might miss the point. It must be challenging to get that across to people in the videos and the promotions on the website. Like, how do you let them know, like, hey, this is a delay, right? Spaced out as a delay, but it's not like your standard delay. We're trying to do something a little unusual and expand the concept of delay almost into something a little more adventurous.
It's hard. I think what I like about a lot of the people that use our plugins is that they seem very curious about it and discover all the different ways you can use them on their own. But yeah, it is hard because, when we're writing the web pages and the manuals, and the newsletters to announce a new product, there's not that much space to explain everything you can do with it. And we've spent months developing it and building all these different like Easter eggs, whatever, or different ways of combining parameters to achieve different things. And we can't really explain that to people easily. It is hard. I don't know if we found a solution for it. I think we'll start doing more of our own content this year. That's the plan, to just have little videos dedicated to one random feature that's maybe being overlooked otherwise. And then there's a little video that only talks about that. But that's definitely a challenge. But I think it's usually a positive one, because people usually find things in the plugins by themselves. It's only occasionally where we'll be blamed for something not working, and then it actually is working, but the user has not figured that out yet. But I guess when that happens, it's our fault too, because we should have communicated it better.
It can be hard, and for me, making instruments sometimes is tricky. One that always comes to mind of mine, I called it Spiral. it was very hard for me to figure out a name, and I just think like people don't understand what it is because I was using Ableton's looper, and I would like play a couple guitar parts and maybe a keyboard, and they're all like looping and reversing, and there's always textures start emerging, and I take that sample and put it in the sampler and turn it into an instrument you can play. So now you've got these like on pitched out multi-instrument thing going, so it's a very organic, moving, alive thing.
Sounds cool. I'd like to try it.
But see how long it took me to explain that to you.
Yeah, it sounds interesting.
It is. I think it's a really cool set of sounds, but
yeah,
it's a really difficult one to just. Here it is. Like.
Yeah.
I always think of the example of the iPod. There were MP3 players that were around, and the only like the nerdiest computer people, programmers that I knew, had an MP3 player until the iPod came out. Because the iPod came out, they said 10,000 songs in your pocket.
Yeah,
and
I agree.
Before that, it was like, well, MP3s are these files that can contain music, and they're much smaller than the traditional CD audio, but they still retain much of the like the average person just doesn't get that. But
it's so true.
The breakthrough was that one sentence: 10,000 songs in your pocket, incomplete sentence even. It's just
no, but it worked.
It was powerful.
And there was a simplicity to also the product itself. It was just this one wheel you could spin around, right? And was there a button in the middle?
I love that wheel. I miss that still. Like
yeah, totally.
I could go through my songs like in one hand in the car, whereas now I have to look at the phone, and I can't even like change my songs when I'm driving.
Yeah, I miss the iPod, the original one.
That was the tactile.
It was such a breakthrough, right?
Mm.
Like the fact that you could have, like, I was traveling around always with a Discman at that time, and suddenly you could have your entire collection on one tiny device.
Yeah.
But not just that, it was so simple. It had less things you could do than the Discman did. It had the wheel and the button, and it was so intuitive. I think Apple in general have just traditionally been really good at that, taking something that's very complex and powerful, but just packaging it in the simplest way ever.
Yeah, that's true. I remember when I first understood the iPod, I, like you, had my Discman, and I'd like to go jogging. And to jog with a CD player, like towards the end, they were like anti-skip technologies, but they still skipped.
Yeah, but even that didn't work.
And it was this big
and it consumed
batteries. My friend had one, and he's like, take this with you and just put your headphones in. And he had his whole music collection in there. And I'm like running around, able to go through it as I'm running and still watch where I'm going. And I was sold at that point.
Yeah, it was such a breakthrough. I remember, it's probably the biggest breakthrough, I think, of our generation in some ways, at least if you're into music. Yeah. I remember feeling like that was just like mind-blowing that you could do that.
Yeah, it's crazy that used to just have to pick something to listen to.
Yeah. 4 CDs to bring on your bus ride.
It may have put a huge dent in the album as we know it. There's probably some negative consequences to all this.
Yeah, that's true. But I mean,
convenience
it made
factors.
Life easier for the user, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting where we will make sacrifices in the name of convenience, because obviously listening to the CD was a much higher fidelity listen than the MP3. But the trade-off in convenience is really undeniable. I'm sure that must translate a little bit into music making, production, plugins, design too, where sometimes those trade-offs are worth it.
Yeah, and it's actually funny you mentioned the iPod iPod. It's been a big inspiration for the next product we're doing. I really love the idea that if a product only communicates one thing, one purpose, it feels so much stronger than if it's trying to be multiple things at once. And I love with the iPod how it was so complex, and it was like a mind-blowing evolution in portable music in itself, but then also as a product, it was extremely simple. And for our next product, we're actually trying to do something similar. So it's a really complex plugin, and definitely by far the most complex thing we've done. But we really actually looked at products like the iPod to say, how can we design it even simpler than anything we've done before, where you just basically have one function, and then of course the ability to shape it a little bit to taste. But yeah, it's something you think about. It's something we think about for sure. Like, you can only really say one thing to people. I think a music plugin can only really be one thing. Like Super VHS couldn't both be a lo-fi plugin and a hi-fi plugin, to take like a very extreme example. I think you have to pick what that thing is and then make it that, you know. So that is definitely something that at least we think about a lot. Like, what is the one thing that this product is? And yeah, not try to be everything at once.
Yeah, we've gotten used to these I do everything products, like our computers and laptops and phones, they do everything. It's like kind of weird to think we used to have a device in our house hanging on the wall that was just for phone calls.
Yeah, totally.
And actually, just recently, my wife bought this thing. I'm drawing a blank on the name, but it's like a notebook. It's a digital notebook. It's like a tablet, basically, but you write on it with this like pencil. It's very smooth. It's all it does. It's just a notebook. Does
it share then? Do you have multiple, and then someone writes in one, and the other
you write in it, and then it goes to the cloud, you know, and so like digitizes whatever you write, and you can have like separate notebooks, but that's all it does. And it was kind of expensive for that, but and even her brother was like, why don't you just get a what are the Windows tablets?
Like the Windows notebooks or whatever they're called, or an iPad even, right?
Yeah, iPad or I can't think of what they're calling them, those Windows ones, but whatever. They're kind of the answer to the iPad.
I've seen them, yeah.
Yeah,
I don't know.
A lot of people love them. They seem pretty cool, but the whole reason she was willing to kind of shell out all this money on just a notebook was because it was just a notebook. And to her brother, it was kind of like a mystery. Like, why would you do that? It only does this, and you could get this thing that does that and everything else. But her thing was like, I just need it to do one thing. I just want it as simple as
you're so right. That's really like a strong point for me and for us also as a company. That you can do everything you can just build a complex plugin chain, and then you can do Super VHS or whatever. But people sometimes, if you're in a creative state of mind, or in your wife's case, I guess she needs one job done. You don't need to have 20,000 options. You just need the one device that helps you get that job done. And it removes the clutter from your brain a little bit. If the thing you want to achieve is right in front of you, but not all the 100 other things you don't want to achieve. So it's funny. I think I'm with her on that. Like, to just like one thing dedicated for one purpose and another thing dedicated for another. I think that actually makes at least creative processes a lot more intuitive, and also life in general. I think it's funny. I definitely agree with that.
Yeah, I think it's an issue with my computer. Like when I'm trying to make music, is that it does everything. It's got my emails, it's got the internet, it's got everything, and it's so easy to slip off into one of the other paths. I've almost always have my web browser open. Do you remember like when we used to go on the internet? I'm going to go on the internet now. We just don't do that anymore. We're on the internet all the time. It doesn't matter. I've found just like quitting my web browser recently. Like, it doesn't need to be open all the time. Just quit it. Has been a big help. Closing out the email program, because it's just another thing that pulls you away and takes you away from the mission. And sometimes having those things, and it's like having any plugin that's really specific like that. It's just for this.
I think as a human, you can only really do two things at once anyway. You know, sometimes it's better not to have all the clutter and all the distractions, all these things.
Yeah.
Sometimes we just need to focus.
Yeah. You know, it's one thing I love about doing the podcast is it's a focused conversation where my phone is off. One of the like rare moments in the day, it's not just in my pocket, right? And I'm not going on the internet or anything. I do have your website open that I've been kind of looking at things a little bit, but it's you know, so much of our life is distracted, and even conversations we have with the people we're closest with, half the time they have a phone in their hand, or the TV's on, or there's something else happening too. And this has been just so fun for me to have these focused times with someone to talk and get things out and learn.
Yeah.
I've found too, I have this like, I think we all have it, this kind of urge to get what we want to say out in a conversation, because like we know time's running out because the phone's going to ring, the TV's going to go off, we got a meeting next.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
I've been able to learn, I had to learn to just sort of like let people talk and listen.
Yeah.
Because there's time now. We know we're going to get to things, and it's not just one of the 17 other things we're doing in this moment.
That's what's so great about the podcast format. You know, it really allows, like I follow football, like European soccer quite a lot. And the way that was covered in the past was always in headlines. And whenever there were interviews, it was like 5 minutes, maybe with a coach or whatever. And I think like the podcast revolution, at least in soccer, it came a little later than elsewhere. It has really meant you can start to understand things at a different level, and you can go in depth and listen to these long conversations, and it's very good.
Yeah, it is. Everything has benefited just to hear like the nuance of what people do instead of like the quick bullet point that is probably the same bullet point on every other appearance they have anyway.
Exactly.
To really,
my problem is I don't listen to enough music anymore because I spend too much time listening to podcasts every day. You know, that's something I need to work on.
Yeah, and even music listening, right? Half the time it's like this side activity you're doing.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's nice to just put on that record and put on that song and just take it in.
Yeah, totally.
But
and be focused in that as well.
There's so many other things pulling at us, right?
Yeah.
I think
all
that
the time.
This philosophy of what you're doing with the plugins, the one thing, one job kind of approach is something we need more of in general, because we just have so much coming in all the time and so many things we can do, and so many, like it's like impossible to be bored anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think out of boredom, like comes a lot of like cool things. Like if you're bored, you might pick up your guitar or whatever, work on a project around the house or something, whatever it is you need to do. You'll find something to be productive. But when there's just constant flow of information and websites I can go to and videos I can watch, and they already know what I want to watch next. It's already queued up.
Yeah.
They know better than I do. You have to sort of fight that. You gotta
totally
get out of that like purposefully, or else you're just sucked into it. And
100%.
Every day I get sucked into something, and I wonder, where did the time go?
Tell me about it. Yeah, I think it's like that for all of us, right, these days.
Yeah.
A lot of distractions.
Yeah, that's for sure. But I think it's cool what you guys are doing. You're focusing. You're giving us like something to
trying. Yeah. Thanks.
Help direct us and make us, when we need that one thing, we know where to go.
Yeah, that's the idea. It's we've only just gotten started. We have so much we want to get out.
I'm shocked that it was 2019. It must have been like January 3rd. It feels it doesn't feel like 2
March,
years. Maybe. It's wild. It's become so much a part of my day-to-day, music work. that I just can't believe it's only been such a short time. So
Yeah,
congratulations
but
on
as
that.
you rightly say, 2020 was 5 years in itself, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, it's been a crazy ride, but we have some stuff that's coming up now, projects we're working on that are definitely for us internally raising the bar a lot in terms of what we're trying to do. So I feel like it can't happen quick enough right now. You know, there's a few things that we have on the way that I just want to get out there now. So yeah, so the next 2 years hopefully will be as fast in terms of what happens as the first 2 years were.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of potential for that with the work you've done so far. I'm excited to see what happens next. It's always fun when you guys come out with something because it's like, oh, this is new. This is I don't have that. You know, that's something fresh. And there are great plugin companies that make things all the time where I'm like, well, yeah, I don't really need another emulation of that particular channel strip or like it's nice to have something that's like, oh, well, I haven't seen this before. You know, how is this going to change what I do?
Yeah, I mean, we try to do that. One of the things that we're very like aware of is to be like digitally native, or to say like we don't want to compare everything we do to analog hardware and say analog hardware is the gold standard and the best we could ever achieve is to do a 99.9% emulation of that. We'd rather say like we're in this digital environment, we make software plugins that appear on a screen, and let's almost forget analog gear and let's forget what's been done in the past. Of course, we can't do that, and our stuff is full of references to that as well. But we really try and see like how can we treat this as let's start from scratch here. Like we have really potent computers. Every user has very strong, processing power at their disposal. So you can really do a lot nowadays. You don't have to just like emulate a 1176 compressor or whatever. You can really just do anything, right? Like there's no limitations really. You can do whatever you want. It's and we try. I'm not saying we've succeeded yet. We're still figuring out what we are as a company and still trying to push ourselves to do better. But that's the idea, to just say like, if something exists already, there's no point in us making it. But what can we do with computers and digital technology and the fact that there's so much processing power? What can we do to do something new?
That's fun. That's exciting.
Yeah.
We all benefit from that. So thank you.
Fun for us. A lot of fun.
Yeah, I think that comes through in the work in so many things, but here especially the fun factor definitely comes through. You can tell like we were having fun making this, and it makes making the music more fun. Yeah,
definitely.
Nice, man. Well, is there any so let's give the website. So it's one of these cool like futuristic web addresses. It's baby audio, but you put the dot before the I. So it's babyaud.io, which is a nice cool shortened.
It's actually because we couldn't buy babyaudio.com when we started. We've since gotten it, so you can also do babyaudio.com, but we've just kept babyaud.io.
Yeah, that's nice.
That's the main one. That's where it started.
Clean.
Yeah.
It reminds me of like the aesthetic of the company in general.
Yeah. Simplify, right?
Yeah. So that's babyaudio.com or babyaud.io. There's so many cool ones here, and as well as a couple freebies if you want to just wet your feet. The Magic Switch, which is from the Super VHS plugin, which I think people should check out, which is just a cool chorus with a little dry wet, which I don't think is on Super VHS. So it's kind of it's worth having even if you already have Super VHS, in my opinion. I've just dropped it on tracks because again, it's easy. I want magic. Yeah. Here it is.
Yeah.
Exactly. And then kind of the mini version of a Comeback Kid, which is Baby Comeback, both free, which I think are kind of no-brainers for your collection. And then I think it'll probably get you in the world, and you'll want to get all the other ones too.
That would be nice.
Yeah. Yeah, so check it out, everybody, babyaudio.com. Is there anything else, any place you want to direct people, or?
I think the freebies is a good start. And also, of course, there's free trials of all the plugins. And the other thing, write us, like we actually try to encourage users to write their feedback. It can be good things, bad things, ideas, whatever. Yeah, write us anything. Like, give us your feedback, send us your ideas for how we can improve the products. And we love being in touch with people who use our products.
That's the beauty now, too. There's so much possibility for like smaller companies. You guys have like a nice intimate group of people where if it was some giant factory, like all this like communication and direct interaction with your users could get lost in whether just the bureaucracy or like the telephone game or something. But that you guys get to have that connection and like learn what people are doing. And as I said, you're always sharing other people's posts that are using your products. So I think you're kind of building a nice community that way too. And yeah, they listen, guys.
No, for sure. I mean, we'll definitely answer. So just send us your thoughts. We'd love to hear them.
Very good. I thank you so much for taking the time to talk. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was great. It was fun to be on. Definitely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for all the work. I really do love using your stuff. I also especially appreciate you partnering up with the Music Production Club last month. That was a lot of fun. And I look forward to what's next and continuing to work together and catching up with you again.
Likewise. Thanks for letting me be on.
My pleasure. Thank you for coming. And thank you, everyone, for listening. I hope you enjoyed the show. Please check out babyaudio.com or .io, however you prefer. I'll put the links in the show notes. Get you the direct page for the freebies. And then have yourselves a great day. Thanks a lot.